Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Hogwarts has always been considered a magical place that every child dreams of entering. Many adults would not refuse such a chance either. Yet behind the fairy tale beauty of the ancient castle lie countless dangers. The films showed only a part of them: the moving staircases, the three-headed dog Fluffy, the basilisk that hunted Muggleborns, the Whomping Willow, and of course, the most dangerous sport of all, Quidditch. In fact, J.K. Rowling's books mention many more situations that could have turned into real tragedies. Here, we recall those dangers that never made it to the screen but could have easily become deadly trials for the students. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The main threat: the students themselves. The most serious risk at Hogwarts is not magical creatures or poltergeists, but the students themselves. Every one of them is armed with a wand, and the ban on spells in the corridors is regularly broken. In the books, magical conflicts happen far more often than in the films, and the hospital wing is rarely empty. Even ordinary quarrels ended with burns, curses, or immobilized bodies. On trains, without teacher supervision, fights escalated into full-fledged magical duels. Fists were also involved. Harry, the Weasley twins, and others often settled disputes through brute force. Number 2. Staircase traps. The architecture of the castle seems designed to test children's resilience. The staircases shift direction, confuse students, and force them to constantly look for new routes. Even worse, some steps vanish right beneath their feet. First years have great difficulty memorizing these treacherous places. Even older students sometimes fell into the traps when they let their attention slip for just a moment. The books mention that not only scatterbrained Neville suffered from false steps, but Harry himself as well, whenever his mind was occupied with other concerns. Number 3. The dangerous journey to the castle. For first years, the introduction to Hogwarts begins with a boat ride across the lake. At first glance, it seems like a beautiful tradition, allowing them to see the castle for the very first time. Yet behind the romance lies real danger. The lake is deep and unpredictable. Even in calm weather, the crossing could end with someone falling overboard. One year, Colin Creevy's younger brother was thrown into the water, and only the intervention of the giant squid saved him from disaster. In bad weather, during a storm or gale, such a tradition could easily have turned into tragedy, since dozens of boats are supervised by only one Hagrid. Number 4. Peeves, the spirit of mischief. The poltergeist that inhabits the castle is yet another constant source of trouble. His pranks are rarely deadly, but injuries and frayed nerves are guaranteed. Peeves drops crutches on students' heads, topples furniture, and lurks in corridors to launch heavy objects at unsuspecting victims. First years suffer the most, being unable to defend themselves. Even older students are often forced to avoid certain corridors if Peeves is on duty. During Umbridge's reign, he became completely uncontrollable, flooding floors and creating utter chaos throughout the school. Number 5. Hogwarts behind the scenes. The films showed only part of the dangers: the basilisk, the forbidden forest, and the forbidden third-floor corridor. But the books reveal many more details left out of the adaptations. Hogwarts remains a place where wonder and magic go hand in hand with danger, and every school year turns into a test of endurance, courage, and luck. Number 5. The forbidden forest, deadly secrets at every step. The Forbidden Forest was not just a place of shadows, it was a hunting ground filled with creatures far beyond a child's ability to resist. Acromantulas the size of carriages lurked in their webs, and even Hagrid, who raised Aragog, admitted they were beyond his control. Unicorns wandered under the trees, their blood so powerful that Voldemort himself drank it to survive. The forest was full of monsters, some so dangerous that even Hagrid stayed well clear of them: Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. To step between those trees was to step into a place where death waited quietly. Yet Hogwarts treated the forest as a lesson in courage. First years, like Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Draco, were sent there as punishment, told to search for a wounded unicorn in the dark. It was in that moment Harry came face to face with Voldemort, a figure cloaked and crawling across the ground to drink blood. It was drinking the unicorn's blood. The cloaked figure raised its head and blood dribbled down its front. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That was detention in Hogwarts, not lines on parchment, not cleaning cauldrons, but a walk into the jaws of the forest where even survival was never guaranteed. Number 6. Ghosts, not always harmless neighbours. Not all ghosts of Hogwarts were gentle guides or comic figures. Some carried histories so dark that their very presence chilled the air. The Bloody Baron was the clearest example. His robes were stained with silvery blood, a reminder of the murder he committed in life. His eyes, described as burning with mad fury, frightened not only students, but even Peeves the poltergeist, who bowed to no one else, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Meeting him alone in a deserted hallway was not an encounter anyone would wish for. The Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw, wore her own sorrow like a shroud. She revealed to Harry that she had fled with her mother's diadem, only to be hunted down and murdered by the very man who became the Bloody Baron. That tragic connection bound their spirits in torment. When she whispered her story in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the weight of her pain was unmistakable. A ghost could not harm with fists or wands, but their despair and fury could terrify, unnerve, and lead the living astray. Even nearly headless Nick, friendly though he was, had his grim side. He never forgot the botched execution that left him wandering the earth with his head half severed. On his death day, Harry witnessed a feast of ghosts reliving their own violent ends. Candles burned blue, music groaned, and hundreds of spirits floated in gloom. Hogwarts was not just a school filled with young laughter, it was also a resting place for the restless dead, their tragedies echoing in every corridor. Number 7. Cursed Objects and Books. The restricted section of the Hogwarts library was not just a place of forbidden knowledge, it was a chamber of danger disguised as shelves of books. Harry discovered this when he borrowed his father's invisibility cloak and crept between the rows at night. He opened one of the volumes only to be met with a piercing scream that shattered the silence of the castle. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek filled the room. One of the books had begun to scream, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Even the act of reading could draw attention, or worse, unleash something the reader could not control. Some volumes were more violent than others. The Monster Book of Monsters, used in care of magical creatures, snapped and bit at anyone foolish enough to open it incorrectly. Students like Neville Longbottom learned this the hard way, fumbling with the straps while the book chased him across the dormitory. It was meant as a textbook, yet it behaved like a predator. The Monster Book of Monsters had snapped shut on his fingers and was now scuttling across the floor, growling, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Even schoolwork could maim. And then there was Tom Riddle's diary, a simple, unmarked book that lured Ginny Weasley into pouring out her soul. The diary, wrote back, entranced her and slowly drained her life. It opened the Chamber of Secrets and unleashed the basilisk on the school. What looked like harmless parchment carried the memory and will of Voldemort himself. The danger of cursed books was not abstract. It walked through Hogwarts whispering in Ginny's hand, proving that knowledge in the wrong form could be as deadly as any dark spell. Number 8. Secret Passages, Traps for the Careless. The Marauder's map revealed a secret world beneath Hogwarts. 7 hidden passages led beyond the castle walls, but they were not safe shortcuts. Some collapsed under the weight of centuries, others crawled with creatures no student wanted to meet in the dark. Curiosity could easily turn into disaster. What looked like freedom often became a trap. Harry learned this truth in his 3rd year when Fred and George Weasley gifted him the map. Out of the 7 secret passages that we know of once caved in, 1 or 2 are watched by Filch, and the 4th leads right into the Whomping Willow, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Even the brothers, who had explored nearly every corner of the castle, warned him. A wrong turn could bring a student face to face with the willows, crushing branches, or into the grasp of Filch himself. The most notorious path led to the Shrieking Shack, the so-called most haunted building in Britain. In truth, it had been built to contain Remus Lupin during his transformations. Any student wandering into that tunnel without knowing its history risked stumbling into the lair of a werewolf. The trapdoor beneath the willow did not forgive mistakes. The tunnel was low, dark, and winding. At the end stood the Shrieking Shack, silent and waiting. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. One misstep could have cost Harry his life. For thrill-seekers, these secret routes promised adventure. For the careless, they promised danger. To explore them alone was to gamble with fate. Blocked exits, prowling creatures, and curses hidden in the stone made sure of it. At Hogwarts, even the walls hid tests of courage, and every secret door whispered the same warning. Only the prepared would find their way back. Number 9, magical plants, enemies disguised as greenery. Herbology sounded harmless enough. Students imagined flowers, soil, and watering cans. But in the greenhouses of Hogwarts, danger grew quietly in pots and tangled vines. Professor Sprout's lessons were never a walk in the park. They were a battle of survival against plants that could choke, poison, or scream loud enough to kill. What looked like ordinary greenery often hid something far more sinister. The Devil's Snare nearly ended the adventures of Harry, Ron, and Hermione in their very first year. In the chamber beneath the trapdoor, the plant coiled around their arms and necks, tightening with every movement. The Devil's Snare bound their hands, feet, and necks, and Harry felt himself being dragged down. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Only Hermione's quick thinking saved them. Sunlight and heat, she remembered, would force the plant to retreat. Without her knowledge, all 3 would have been swallowed by the darkness of its coils. And then there were mandrakes, taught to second years. Their cries were not just unpleasant, but lethal. The seedlings could be managed with earmuffs, but as they matured, a single shriek could stop a heart instantly. Professor Sprout warned them, yet children handled these deadly roots as if it were normal homework. The cry of the mandrake is fatal to anyone who hears it. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. One slip, one forgotten earmuff, and a student might collapse on the spot. This was Hogwarts' version of education. From Devil's Snare to blood-sucking vines, every greenhouse was filled with hidden threats. Students were expected to master them, to know which leaves could heal and which stems could strangle. Magic was never safe, and herbology proved that even the most beautiful flower might be waiting to end your life. Number 10. Portraits with a temper. The moving portraits of Hogwarts were more than decorations. They were alive, stubborn, and unpredictable. At first glance, they seemed charming, guides who could point a lost first year toward the library or the Great Hall. But those same portraits had minds of their own, and many were far from friendly. They whispered, gossiped, and sometimes refused to cooperate at the worst possible moment. The fat lady guarding the entrance to Gryffindor Tower was the clearest example. Her moods often decided whether students could enter or not. Neville Longbottom once learned this the hard way. "Password?" demanded the fat lady, pointing at the door. "Pig snout," said Neville. "That's yesterday's password, my dear boy," she cried indignantly. "Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone." A single mistake meant hours stranded in the corridor, vulnerable to Filch, Peeves, or worse. The safety of an entire common room rested on the temper of one painting. And sometimes the paintings failed altogether. When Sirius Black slashed the portrait of the fat lady with his knife, The Gryffindor entrance was left unguarded. Panic spread through the castle. The portrait's shredded canvas was proof that art could not always protect flesh and blood. Dumbledore himself had to step in, searching for a replacement guardian. Even the magical defences of Hogwarts were only as strong as the whims of those who controlled them. Other portraits scattered through the corridors took part in school life in their own way. They spied, they tattled, they argued. Students never knew if the smiling nobleman in gilded frames would offer help or run off to report them to the nearest professor. In the living castle of Hogwarts, even the walls had eyes, and those eyes could betray you at any moment. Number 11. Filch and his instruments of torture. Argus Filch was never just the grumpy caretaker seen in the films. In the books, his character carries a much darker edge. As a squib, born without magical powers in a world of wizards, his bitterness ran deep. He could not perform spells, yet every day he walked the halls of Hogwarts surrounded by children who wielded magic casually. That envy grew into resentment. He watched them break rules, cause chaos, and use abilities he would never possess. And behind his sullen face lurked a man who longed to punish them harshly. His office was more than a storage room for lost items. On the walls hung chains and shackles, grim reminders of the punishments he dreamed of restoring. Filch himself admitted his regret that such measures were no longer allowed. Rowling gives us the chilling line. On the walls of his office hung chains and manacles, and Filch regretted their use had been discontinued. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. That single detail reveals everything. He wasn't satisfied with detentions or cleaning cauldrons. He imagined discipline that looked more like medieval torture than school punishment. Imagine what could have happened if Albus Dumbledore had not been headmaster. Without his restraint, Filch might have been given free rein to torment students. His hatred for Peeves the poltergeist already pushed him to extremes. He tried to banish Peeves countless times, failing again and again, and each failure made him angrier. When he caught students sneaking through the corridors after curfew, there was real menace in his eyes. Even Harry felt it. Filch's face contorted with rage, his eyes bulging as if he had finally caught his greatest prey, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The films softened him into comic relief. The books never let readers forget the danger. Argus Filch was a man who lived in the shadow of magic, consumed by bitterness, and surrounded by weapons he could not use. If discipline had been his to command, Hogwarts might have resembled a prison. The chains in his office were not relics. They were symbols of the punishment he dreamed of inflicting, and only Dumbledore's authority kept that dream from becoming a terrifying reality. Number 12. Everyday objects gone wrong. The world of Hogwarts is often painted in golden light, a castle of enchantment where learning flourishes under the guidance of wise professors. Yet beneath the charm lies a darker thread that is seldom acknowledged in the films: the danger of everyday enchanted objects. These are not only the cursed relics locked away in secret chambers, but also the books, wands, mirrors, and furniture that can turn against their users with frightening ease. Even the most innocent object may conceal a peril waiting for the unsuspecting student. The boundaries between useful magic and unpredictable harm are thin, and Hogwarts is filled with reminders of just how quickly a simple item can betray its owner. Ron Weasley's broken wand is the first example that shows how treacherous magic can be when ordinary items fail. After his wand snapped during the crash into the Whomping Willow, he continued to use it in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The results were disastrous. Ron's wand let out a loud bang and shot out a jet of green sparks, the text recalls, only for the spell to rebound upon him. The infamous moment when Ron attempted to hex Draco Malfoy and ended up vomiting slugs in the courtyard remains etched in memory. Ron's wand gave a loud bang and a jet of green light shot out of the wrong end. Ron staggered, clutched his stomach, and doubled over. A tool meant for defense became a source of humiliation and genuine physical pain, a reminder that even the simplest magical instrument turns into a weapon when damaged. The castle itself is littered with books that blur the line between learning and lethal threat. In the restricted section of the library, volumes are chained to shelves because their enchantments are dangerous to the unprepared. Harry once recalled that a single book he opened screamed so loudly that he nearly gave himself away during a nighttime escapade. This detail, described in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, exposes a reality omitted from the films. Knowledge itself can scream, scratch, and scar. Some grimoires are alive with enchantments that bite or burn. Hermione Granger, despite her relentless pursuit of wisdom, warned her friends more than once about the danger of opening such books without guidance. It is not a metaphorical warning. Within Hogwarts, knowledge literally has teeth. Even the furniture in Hogwarts carries hazards that go far beyond ordinary inconvenience. The castle's staircases famously shift without warning, leading students into dangerous situations or trapping them in corridors where they are not meant to be. The moving stairs create not just mischief, but real peril. Imagine a first year carrying heavy books suddenly finding the staircase vanish beneath their feet, forcing them to leap onto another platform or risk injury. Harry himself experienced being carried away to unintended locations more than once, particularly in his first year. The whimsical quality of moving staircases conceals the undeniable fact. The very ground within Hogwarts resists certainty and control, and safety is never absolute. The Mirror of Erised stands as a chilling example of how even a stationary object can ensnare the soul. Introduced in Harry's first year, it showed not knowledge or danger in the physical sense, but a temptation so overwhelming that Dumbledore himself warned of its peril. Men have wasted away before it, not knowing if what they have seen is real or even possible, Dumbledore explained. For Harry, who saw his lost family within the glass, the mirror was both a comfort and a curse. What harm can a simple mirror do? At Hogwarts, such an object can consume a life. The danger is not fire or teeth, but obsession, an enchantment woven into the very surface that preys upon longing. More sinister still was Tom Riddle's diary, a plain-looking book that concealed a fragment of Voldemort's soul. It seemed an ordinary diary when Ginny Weasley first wrote in it, but each word she penned was absorbed and twisted against her. "Dear Tom, I think I'm losing my memory. There are rooster feathers all over my robes and I don't know how they got there," Ginny confessed in her entries. What she did not know was that the diary used her hand to open the Chamber of Secrets and release the basilisk. An everyday object carried by students without suspicion became an instrument of terror. The diary represents perhaps the most striking example of Hogwarts' hidden dangers, that even innocence, like a schoolgirl's secret thoughts, can be weaponized. Through accursed possession, other books carried different yet equally disturbing enchantments. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Hagrid chose the Monster Book of Monsters as a textbook for care of magical creatures. Unlike a normal book, this one needed to be restrained with a belt because it would bite anyone who opened it carelessly. The book snapped shut on Harry's hand, leaving neat teeth marks, the text recounts. What should have been a tool for learning nearly became a predator in its own right. Students were forced to approach their textbooks like wild animals, a detail that underscores how, in Hogwarts, even the educational material could draw blood. It is not only textbooks that misbehave. The enchanted chess pieces used in Wizard's chess move with violent intent, smashing each other into fragments as though locked in battle. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione relied upon this enchanted set during their first year to guard the Philosopher's Stone, the brutality of the pieces was no small matter. Ron was nearly crushed by a giant knight in the life-sized version of the game. The White Queen smashed the Black Knight into tiny pieces, the narrative recalls. These were not harmless toys, but sentient, aggressive figures capable of inflicting real harm, A game becomes combat when the pieces themselves act with force. Number 13. School pets, cute or deadly. Hogwarts has always been presented as a castle filled with wonder, where even the most ordinary details of student life shimmer with magic. But there is a danger lurking in the background of everyday life that the films never truly explored: the threat posed by student pets. Officially, pupils are allowed to bring only owls, cats, or toads. Yet behind this simple rule hides a complex and perilous reality. Animals at Hogwarts are never merely animals, and even the most innocent companion can transform into an agent of chaos, menace, or even death. This shadowy world of scholarly pets reveals far more risk than the story ever dared to show on the screen. The first and clearest example of this danger comes from Ron Weasley's rat, Scabbers. For years, the shabby grey creature was treated as little more than a lazy, unimpressive pet. But Scabbers was not a rat at all. He was Peter Pettigrew, an unregistered animagus who had betrayed Harry's parents to Voldemort. The novels make this revelation devastatingly clear. Then came a scabbed hand, dragging the rest of him from the bundle of robes. It was a shrunken, balding man with rat-like features, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. What appeared to be a sleepy rodent in a boy's pocket was, in truth, a fully grown wizard hiding in plain sight, capable of sowing terror and destruction. This single fact demonstrates how student pets could easily serve as disguises for dark forces, slipping unnoticed into the very heart of the castle. The danger did not stop with Pettigrew's betrayal. Scabbers, as a rat, actively endangered the students even before his identity was revealed. He bit, scratched, and spread fear when Crookshanks relentlessly hunted him. The books recall Crookshanks leapt onto Ron's chest, claws extended, and Scabbers fled in terror. The pursuit of this false pet stirred suspicion, divided friendships, and nearly destroyed the fragile trust between Ron and Hermione. A pet at Hogwarts was never just a quiet companion. It could shift the balance of loyalty, manipulate relationships, and serve as a tool for betrayal. If a single rat could do this, what of creatures even more dangerous? Hermione's Crookshanks, while loyal to her, showed how even approved pets could spiral into aggression. Half Kneazle by blood, Crookshanks possessed instincts far sharper than an ordinary cat's, often treating fellow pets not as companions, but as prey. More than once, Crookshanks launched attacks with a ferocity that alarmed even Harry. Crookshanks with a yowl leapt onto the rat, claws outstretched. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. This aggressive nature, though in the end useful in exposing Pettigrew, reveals how the line between protection and violence is dangerously thin when magical creatures are allowed free rein in the castle. What if Crookshanks had turned his instincts against another student instead of a disguised animagus? The issue runs deeper than these examples. The very idea of owls as standard pets reveals overlooked hazards. In the wizarding world, owls are not merely birds. They are messengers capable of delivering secret letters, valuable items, and even cursed objects. Harry's own snowy owl, Hedwig, was trusted and gentle, but the role of owls in carrying messages could just as easily be twisted for evil. A malicious student could smuggle in forbidden artifacts or even transmit dangerous magical substances right into the school under the guise of innocent correspondence. Hedwig soared through the night sky, carrying Harry's letter clutched in her talons. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Now imagine those talons gripping something far more deadly than parchment. Even toads, the most unglamorous of permitted pets, cannot be dismissed as harmless. Neville Longbottom's toad, Trevor, seemed more a nuisance than a threat, constantly escaping his owner's grasp. Yet in a world where simple frogs could be transformed with dark enchantments, Trevor's wandering offered countless opportunities for sabotage. A single hex could have turned him into a carrier of poison or a vessel for eavesdropping. The joke about Neville constantly searching for his toad hides a darker reality. In a castle brimming with spells, every lost creature could become a weapon against its master, or the entire student body. The hidden peril of pets is not limited to the animals themselves. Hogwarts students are surrounded by teachers whose attitudes toward magical creatures are deeply reckless, none more so than Rubeus Hagrid. His love of dangerous beasts is legendary, and his willingness to introduce lethal monsters into student life raises disturbing questions. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he hands the trio a dragon egg as casually as if it were a puppy. "It's a dragon's egg, Harry. I won it off a stranger I met down the pub." The fact that he believed this was suitable company for an 11-year-old speaks volumes about how easily Hogwarts could be infiltrated by hazardous creatures under the pretext of pets or harmless companions. The films portray Hogwarts as a place where students move freely with their animals, yet they avoid showing the darker edge of this policy. Consider the possibilities of a Slytherin student with ill intent smuggling in a venomous serpent or a cursed spider. The Chamber of Secrets already proved what havoc a single monster could wreak when hidden beneath the school. Why then should we assume that the animal companions visible in dormitories and classrooms were safe? A low, hissing voice spoke from the shadows, and Harry understood it, though no one else could. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This chilling moment, tied to Parseltongue and serpents, foreshadows how easily dangerous creatures could be disguised as harmless companions. Number 14. Exams. Stress on the edge of magical collapse. During the haze of spring, when the castle of Hogwarts should have been alive only with Quidditch matches and the laughter of students by the Black Lake, another kind of storm always approached. The stress of exams crept through every corridor, seeping into the common rooms like a dark mist. It was not the kind of stress familiar to the Muggle world, measured only in late nights of study and ink-stained fingers. Here, the weight of expectation pressed against a far more volatile force, uncontrolled magic. A student's nervous twitch could ignite sparks. A lapse in concentration might transform parchment into a living creature. This was a danger rarely captured on film, but one written clearly in the books. J.K. Rowling herself hinted at it when she described how a boy, trembling before an exam, accidentally sprouted a peacock's tail. One boy had been so nervous that he grew a peacock's tail and had to be excused, we read in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This simple sentence hides an entire world of peril that unfolded during those weeks of magical testing. The truth is that the classrooms of Hogwarts became far more hazardous during exam season than during any ordinary defense against the dark arts duel. Think of Seamus Finnegan, whose talent for accidental explosions was almost legendary. When calm and collected, he could at least keep the worst of the destruction contained. But under exam pressure, his charms could easily detonate, sending quills flying and singeing the robes of his neighbours. Imagine the chaos when dozens of young witches and wizards, all jittery and pale, attempted to transfigure animals or summon objects in perfect unison. A single mispronounced syllable could result in catastrophe. The great hall, transformed into an examination chamber, became a cauldron of fear, magic, and sweat, where each flick of a wand risked becoming a spark in a powder keg. Hermione Granger may have approached exams with meticulous preparation, but even she admitted the terror that lingered. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, she carried around a dozen large, heavy books and made color-coded notes, but her obsessive study revealed how high the stakes truly were. For Muggle-born students like her, failure meant more than a poor grade. It meant the possibility of being underestimated, dismissed, or ridiculed in a world where blood status still cast a shadow. The stress was suffocating, and though the films gave us flashes of Hermione's determination, they could never quite capture the underlying fear that ran through the student body, the fear that their own magic, turned against them by anxiety, might betray them at the worst possible moment. Neville Longbottom is perhaps the clearest example of how exams pushed students to the brink of magical collapse. His insecurities were notorious, and Professor Snape exploited them cruelly. During potions tests, Neville's hands shook so violently that even a simple stirring motion could produce smoke, acid, or explosions. One can imagine the boy's heart hammering as he faced the silent rows of students, quills, scratching, while a single mistake might mean not just a failing grade, but an injury. Neville's lack of confidence was a danger in itself, for as Professor McGonagall once remarked, transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Under examination conditions, that danger was magnified, and Neville was not the only student trembling at the thought of their wand turning against them. There were, of course, the lighter mishaps, comical in hindsight, but terrifying in the moment. Fred and George Weasley once spoke gleefully of how exam stress led some students to accidentally hex themselves into temporary baldness or cause their parchment to vanish entirely. Ron Weasley himself, during his second year, accidentally turned his quill into a feather duster mid-test, leaving him scrambling for a replacement while the minutes ticked away. The films prefer to show Ron's humour and loyalty, but not the true terror of failing when your wand refuses to cooperate. Each mistake was not merely a blot on paper, but a burst of magic gone astray, often painful, sometimes humiliating, and occasionally requiring a hasty trip to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey, the tireless matron of Hogwarts, became the unseen guardian angel during these weeks. She patched up singed eyebrows, soothed burns, and restored students who had transformed parts of themselves into unintended shapes. The hospital wing filled with a peculiar silence, broken only by groans and the clink of potion bottles. Here, students experienced the real cost of magical education, not noble duels against Death Eaters, but the quiet injuries inflicted by stress, fear, and fragile control. For every heroic story of Harry facing a basilisk, there were a dozen smaller tragedies hidden in the hospital wing: hands that refused to return to human form, ears that turned into cauliflower, and voices silenced when a silencing charm backfired during a spoken exam. The professors themselves, though stern, were not immune to the dangers their students posed. Consider Professor Flitwick, standing barely above the desk as dozens of young witches and wizards attempted charms simultaneously. A misplaced levitation spell could send furniture crashing down upon him. Professor McGonagall, sharp-eyed and composed, had to intervene swiftly when a transfiguration went awry, lest an innocent beetle transform into something venomous or a teacup sprout claws. These teachers bore the responsibility not only of grading, but of maintaining order in a room filled with unstable magic. Their calm presence was a shield against chaos, but even they must have felt the tension vibrating in the air. Number 15, trick stairs and deceptive doors. The shifting staircases of Hogwarts are remembered vividly by every reader, but there is a lesser danger, often overshadowed in the films, that lurked within the castle walls: the treacherous doors. In the very first book, J.K. Rowling hints at their unpredictability, noting how some would remain locked unless one scratched them in the right spot or politely asked for permission. Harry himself encountered these troublesome portals during his earliest wanderings. The films, however, stripped away this menace, leaving corridors too straightforward and neat. Yet in the written world, these doors added a layer of living unpredictability to Hogwarts, turning the school itself into an active participant in the students' education and their suffering. The most haunting part of these enchanted doors was not merely their stubbornness, but their capacity to humiliate. Imagine being a first-year Gryffindor, lost after curfew, clutching a candle that sputters against the cold draughts, only to have a doorway vanish just as you reach it. Rowling wrote with cruel precision. There were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely, or tickled them in exactly the right place. The absurdity of such requirements is immediately clear to adult readers, but for 11-year-olds like Harry, Ron, or Hermione, it was nothing short of perilous. The corridors were cold stone, patrolled by teachers, prefects, and ghosts alike. To be stranded before a stubborn doorway meant more than inconvenience. It meant punishment, humiliation, or even danger. The danger became sharper when paired with the unpredictable staircases. A staircase could shift, leaving a student stranded on an unfamiliar landing where the only exit was a door that mocked their ignorance. Neville Longbottom's struggles embody this perfectly. Known for forgetting passwords and losing his way, Neville was exactly the type of boy who could end up stranded overnight. One can easily picture him, clutching his toad Trevor, trying desperately to remember whether this particular door required scratching at its hinges or humming a tune. For Neville, such moments were not small comic reliefs, but genuine ordeals, heightening his fear and isolation during his early years at Hogwarts. These trick doors were not only inconvenient, but psychologically tormenting. A student who had been humiliated once would approach them with dread. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the narration itself carries an almost mocking tone, as if Hogwarts enjoyed making fools out of children. The castle was alive, whimsical, and cruel in equal measure. It was one thing to face a deadly three-headed dog guarding the trapdoor or a troll in the dungeons. Those were external dangers. It was another to discover that your very school, the place meant to protect and nurture you, could conspire against you with a locked door that laughed in silence at your desperation. The films, in their desire to streamline the story, removed this layer of hostility from the castle. Instead of labyrinthine hallways filled with vanishing portals, the Hogwarts of the screen became grand but manageable, a Gothic dream where students wandered dramatically but rarely risked being stranded. Yet this omission softened the truth of Hogwarts. Rowling wanted us to see that the school was not merely a backdrop, it was an organism with moods, jokes, and teeth. The stubborn doors symbolized this better than nearly anything else. They demanded cleverness, patience, or blind luck, qualities that separated the resourceful from the hapless. Peeves the poltergeist thrived in this environment. If a first year found themselves stuck before a door, Peeves would inevitably appear to compound the misery. Rowling describes how Peeves would throw chalk or hurl insults, relishing the helplessness of stranded children. One can imagine the scene, a trembling student knocking in vain at a door, while Peeves circles overhead, singing in mockery. In such moments, the trick doors became more than inconveniences, they became stages for humiliation. The films, lacking Peeves altogether, missed this cruel theatre of Hogwarts, and in doing so deprived the story of one of its sharpest forms of comic torment. Hermione Granger, with her unshakable memory and logical mind, would have coped better than most. She was the type of student who remembered that one door required tickling at the handle, another a polite request. Still, even she was not immune. In their first year, when the trio attempted to avoid Filch and his lantern, a locked or vanishing door could have spelled disaster. The peril of discovery was not dramatic enough for film, but for readers these little obstacles built tension. Every slammed-shut doorway was a reminder that Hogwarts had rules hidden in its very stones, and those who failed to learn them would suffer. It is worth remembering how the fat lady's portrait also played with similar cruelty, demanding exact passwords and often refusing entry even when a student begged. This was not strictly a door, but it carried the same principle. The entrances in Hogwarts had personalities, moods, and caprices. One memorable incident left Neville sleeping on the corridor floor because he had forgotten the password. Poor kid, as Ron muttered, but the truth was more sinister. A school that forced a child to sleep on stone steps because he forgot a word was not whimsical, it was merciless. Such episodes remind us why these doors were more dangerous than mere comic tricks. The threat of these doors was heightened during times of actual crisis. When the trio raced to prevent Snape, or so they thought, from reaching the Philosopher's Stone, every second mattered. Had one of the castle's vanishing doors chosen that moment to disappear, the entire fate of the stone could have been altered. The text never dramatizes such a disaster, but the possibility lingered. The castle itself could decide the outcome of a battle. In later books, when Hogwarts became a battlefield, one wonders how many students or even Death Eaters were delayed, confused, or trapped by doors that refused to obey. Rowling's description carries an almost folkloric resonance, as though these doors belonged to a fairy tale more than a boarding school. A polite request, a riddle, a vanishing act, all echo the enchanted thresholds of old myths, where doors tested heroes before admitting them to the next stage. Hogwarts, in this sense, was not simply teaching charms or potions. It was forcing its students to live in a world where politeness, cleverness, and adaptability were survival skills. To scratch a door in the right place was a lesson in humility. To ask politely was a lesson in respect. Yet these lessons came cloaked in cruelty, for the punishment of failure was not merely correction, but humiliation and danger. The sense of danger was most acute at night. The corridors after curfew were already frightening, filled with shadows and whispers. A student caught out of bed risked detention or worse. When a door chose to vanish or stay locked, the child was trapped, their candle sputtering low, with only the cold stone for company. The thought of Peeves or a ghost gliding near could drive even the bravest Gryffindor to panic. These doors were silent predators, waiting for their chance to remind students of their ignorance. The films replaced such tension with spectacle, but the books showed the quiet horror of a child's helplessness in the face of a mocking, enchanted threshold. Filch himself, the caretaker, benefited from these doors, whether consciously or not. Many a student, cornered by a stubborn entrance, fell into his hands. He relished the punishments that followed, and the doors seemed almost complicit in his delight. The partnership of Filch's lantern and a vanishing door created a nightmare for any rule-breaker. In this sense, the castle was not neutral. It had favourites, tendencies, and alliances. The doors that demanded politeness or riddles were part of its sly humour, but the doors that vanished before terrified children revealed its darker side. Hogwarts was no mere setting, it was a character, capricious and cruel. One cannot forget how often the trio's adventures depended on luck with doors and staircases. In the Philosopher's Stone, when they stumbled into the forbidden corridor and discovered Fluffy, the entire encounter depended on the doors guiding or misleading them. The architecture itself shaped destiny. A vanishing door at that moment could have spared them the terror of a three-headed dog, but instead the doors allowed their passage, as though the castle wished to test their courage. In this way, Hogwarts played with its children, deciding when to help and when to hinder, its doors the instruments of its will. Perhaps the greatest danger lay not in physical harm, but in erosion of trust. Students could not trust their own school. The staircases shifted, the doors deceived, the portraits demanded passwords, and even the ghosts mocked them. For 11-year-olds sent away from home, this created a constant low hum of anxiety. A locked door at night was not just an inconvenience, it was betrayal. When Harry felt, even in his first year, that Hogwarts was simultaneously a home and a trap, the treacherous doors were part of that realization. They were not mere comic details. They were the castle whispering, "You are not safe here, not even from me." The films chose to leave this out, portraying Hogwarts as a place of wonder, mystery, and grand spectacle. But readers know better. The castle was alive, often cruel, and the doors were its teeth, snapping shut or vanishing at whim. Every child who knocked politely, scratched the right hinge, or guessed a riddle was not simply opening a door. They were passing a test imposed by a school that never ceased to challenge, punish, and mould them. To overlook this detail is to overlook one of the sharpest truths of the series, that the greatest danger of Hogwarts was not the Dark Lord outside its walls, but the castle itself, waiting silently in the dark. Number 16, the kitchen and elf magic. Beneath the magnificent marble floors of Hogwarts' Great Hall lies a secret few students ever fully appreciate. The sprawling kitchen where dozens of house elves work tirelessly to prepare every meal. It is a place described only briefly in the books, never given a proper presence in the films, yet it hides a depth of intrigue that changes how one should view the safety of the castle. The kitchen is not simply a workplace, but a hidden world of ancient elf magic, a world brimming with power no professor or student ever dared to challenge openly. For those who entered without invitation, the sense of vulnerability would be overwhelming, for the elves did not depend on wands, yet their spells could bind, repel, or silence even the most gifted wizard. The reality of this place is striking when one remembers how J.K. Rowling herself pointed out that house elves wield a type of magic separate from human magic, operating under rules the Ministry of Magic could never regulate. House elves have their own brand of magic, which is powerful and unusual, the author revealed outside the main narrative, and the text of Chamber of Secrets underscores it. House elf magic was not like wizard magic. No one knew exactly how powerful it was. This is not a passing remark. It is a statement that shakes the very foundation of Hogwarts' apparent security. The entire school community ate daily from food conjured, transported, or charmed by elves whose loyalty was assumed but never tested in public view. Consider the stark contrast between Dobby's daring interventions and the silence of his peers. When Dobby punished himself for warning Harry, he was displaying not weakness, but an almost frightening autonomy. He did not need a wand to shut off Platform 9 3/4, nor to seal magical barriers. That kind of control over magical structures exceeded anything second-year students were capable of, and yet the same magic flowed freely in the Hogwarts kitchen below the feasting tables. Students laughed and clapped as plates filled with roasts and puddings, oblivious that an unseen legion of magical beings had channeled powers they could not hope to imitate. One must imagine the consequences had a reckless Gryffindor or a curious Ravenclaw tried sneaking into the kitchen without permission. The films give the impression of Hogwarts as merely a maze of shifting staircases, secret chambers, and haunted bathrooms, yet the kitchen posed a subtler danger. The elves were not malevolent, but they were fiercely protective of their duties and traditions. A careless intrusion might not end with simple embarrassment. At the very least, an intruder could find themselves immobilized by magic invisible to the naked eye, pinned in place until the elves decided the punishment fit the crime. In darker scenarios, a rebellious elf could twist food or drink into weapons. Hogwarts' reliance on trust was never more precarious than in that hidden chamber of ovens and cauldrons. Winky's story in Goblet of Fire gives a chilling perspective on what happens when an elf's emotions run unchecked. She, dismissed and humiliated, spiraled into despair and uncontrollable magic, often producing bursts of chaos beyond her control. If one elf, cast out and heartbroken, could display such instability, what might happen if dozens felt collectively insulted or betrayed? The students and staff who depended on them daily never considered that possibility. The ministry regulated wands, monitored underage magic, and punished misuse of spells, yet it paid little attention to the enchantments cast in the Hogwarts kitchen. The imbalance was staggering. When Hermione founded SPGW, her advocacy may have seemed naive to Harry and Ron, but she had unknowingly touched on the greatest unspoken danger of all, the unquestioned loyalty of house elves. Loyalty was never tested until it fractured. Dobby proved that elves could betray masters out of conscience, while Kreacher demonstrated that devotion could twist into manipulation and cruelty. Both carried out acts of astonishing magical sophistication. Dobby could apparate within Hogwarts, something Dumbledore himself admitted was nearly impossible for a wizard. Kreacher could infiltrate Grimmauld Place and evade protective enchantments. That same power lived quietly beneath the Great Hall, woven into the daily ritual of feasting. The question was never if the elves were capable, but whether anyone had the imagination to wonder what they could do if their allegiance shifted. Food at Hogwarts was itself a kind of enchantment, more than sustenance. It appeared instantly, steaming and plentiful, timed to the headmaster's signals. In Goblet of Fire, the detail emerges that the food was prepared and then transported magically from the kitchens to the tables above. That act of transportation was not wizardry, it was elf magic, efficient and untraceable. In a world where poison and tampering were constant threats, recall the cursed necklace or the poisoned mead intended for Dumbledore. This silent system carried immense risk. The staff and students trusted that their unseen benefactors remained benevolent, but no. Protective spells from professors could equal the control elves had over every plate and goblet. A striking example of house elf capability lies in Creature's eventual loyalty to Harry. Once convinced, he organized and commanded other elves in the Battle of Hogwarts, charging into combat armed with kitchen knives yet empowered by raw magical defiance. This was no trivial act. It was evidence that elves, when united under a cause, could act as a disciplined, almost military force. They had the numbers, the stealth, and the magical freedom to bypass protections. If such a force existed beneath Hogwarts every day, unacknowledged by students, then the castle's safety was built less on Dumbledore's wards than on the goodwill of creatures the wizarding world barely respected. The danger becomes clearer when one recalls how easily Dobby manipulated the events at Privet Drive and Hogwarts during Harry's second year. He closed off the barrier at King's Cross, caused a rogue bludger to nearly break Harry's arm, and disrupted school functions with alarming precision. None of this required a wand, incantations, or permission. "Dobby had to stop you, sir, from returning to Hogwarts," he cried, before punishing himself. Yet the underlying truth remained. An elf had single-handedly altered the trajectory of the school year. If such power was exercised from the shadows of the Hogwarts kitchen, it would not take much imagination to see how the entire school could be thrown into disarray. The quote from Chamber of Secrets, "House elf magic was not like wizard magic, no one knew exactly how powerful it was," should ring like a warning bell across the series. Wizards built their institutions on the assumption that wand-based magic was supreme, but the kitchen under the Great Hall was a living contradiction. The elves did not need Latin incantations or precise wand movements. Their magic was instinctual, direct, and often unstoppable. Apparition barriers, jinxes, and charms could not hold them back. Even Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard alive, acknowledged their unique freedom. What did it mean, then, for Hogwarts' greatest vulnerability to lie in the hands of beings considered servants? It is telling that the Marauder's map, that ultimate surveillance tool, never displayed the inner life of the kitchen in its full complexity. Fred and George mentioned its existence casually to Harry, but they never treated it as a zone of danger. Yet the omission of detail was itself suspicious. The map showed people moving through hallways, but what of the elves? Did it register them at all? If not, then here was another chilling fact. Beneath the most heavily guarded school in the magical world, there existed a large community invisible even to its greatest magical instruments. This was not just a blind spot, it was a cavernous risk hidden in plain sight. When one recalls the poisoned mead incident in Half-Blood Prince, the vulnerability becomes more pointed. The beverage, meant for Dumbledore but handed to Ron, nearly killed him. Slughorn was the unwitting courier, but imagine if the elves themselves had been compromised. The entire school consumed their creations thrice daily without inspection. Potions masters brewed antidotes in dungeons, professors raised shields against dark spells, and auras guarded the castle's perimeter, yet no one ever questioned the invisible magic delivering every meal. The films omitted this tension entirely, leaving audiences with a sanitized image of Hogwarts safety. Even the cheerful portrayal of the kitchen when Harry, Ron, and Hermione first entered with the help of the painting of fruit belies its true weight. The elves greeted them kindly, pressing trays of food, eager to please, but politeness is not proof of harmlessness. Beneath their courtesy lay a culture bound by rules older than Hogwarts itself, rules that demanded obedience, but also empowered punishment. The students could giggle at the sight of tiny creatures offering pies, yet they stood in a chamber of power as ancient and unstudied as the Forbidden Forest. To think of Hogwarts as a fortress is to forget the hidden foundation of its daily life. The great hall dazzled with enchanted ceilings, its candles floating on unseen currents, yet just below its floor, dozens of beings wielded magic no headmaster ever fully controlled. Their silence was not weakness, it was the hum of power kept in check by loyalty, routine, and centuries of unchallenged tradition. The danger was never that elves might rebel suddenly, but that wizards had built their greatest institution on trust without safeguards. For all its wards, charms, and aura patrols, Hogwarts' greatest risk was served at every breakfast, lunch, and dinner, carried on plates from a kitchen no student ever truly understood. Number 17, Potions Class, an explosion waiting to happen. Under the flickering torchlight of the Hogwarts dungeons, the walls seemed to sweat with moisture, and the air hung thick with the scent of crushed roots, burnt herbs, and strange fumes that could make even the most confident student nervous. Potions Class was never simply about following instructions from a textbook. It was about discipline, precision, and an ability to remain calm while sitting beside cauldrons that could erupt with acid or spew poisonous gas if one's hand slipped for even a moment. Professor Snape's presence only intensified the tension. His watchful gaze and cutting remarks kept the class in constant fear of error, yet the real danger came from the cauldrons themselves. Each student was a beginner alchemist surrounded by ingredients with volatile properties, and the combination of stress, inexperience, and combustible substances created a setting where disaster was always one small mistake away. The novels describe how Neville Longbottom, whose nerves were rarely steady, often became the victim of potions mishaps. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, a particularly vivid scene captures the risks of this subject. One of Neville's cauldrons emitted a cloud of smoke and spouted a fountain of hot solution that instantly ate through his shoes. The image of a young boy hopping frantically around the dungeon floor while a corrosive liquid destroyed his boots illustrates the sheer unpredictability of potion making. This was not merely an academic inconvenience. Had that liquid splashed on Neville's face instead of his footwear, the consequences might have been disfigurement or worse. The danger was real, and yet in the films, the volatile chaos of these lessons is barely touched upon. The daily routine of a potions class included ingredients that would terrify any reasonable parent sending their child off to school. Dried billywig stings, volatile doxy eggs, and crushed fire seeds were all present in the storerooms, and each could cause burns or allergic reactions if mishandled. Students were expected to slice shrivel figs, dice puffer pods, and stir concoctions at precise intervals and in exact directions. A counterclockwise stir added at the wrong stage could cause an explosion, while overheating a solution might release toxic vapors. The precision required was immense, yet Hogwarts placed this responsibility on the shoulders of 11-year-olds, many of whom still struggled with basic wand control. It was not uncommon for Madame Pomfrey in the hospital wing to see burns, rashes, or dizziness directly after a session in Snape's classroom. While Neville often drew attention for his clumsiness, he was not alone in suffering mishaps. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Seamus Finnegan managed to produce an explosion so dramatic that the classroom was left filled with smoke, singed eyebrows, and dripping cauldrons. His reputation for blowing things up in charms carried into potions, where his over-enthusiastic additions often resulted in more bang than brew. The danger was compounded by the fact that every explosion did not just endanger the cauldron's owner, but also the students seated nearby. A poorly brewed potion could spill onto neighboring tables, mixing with other concoctions, and trigger unpredictable chain reactions. The very environment of the dungeons amplified the sense of peril. Damp air and low ceilings created an oppressive mood, and the faint hiss of simmering cauldrons echoed against the stone walls. Students often described how the air grew thick with fumes that irritated the throat and eyes. Imagine a group of children surrounded by bubbling mixtures releasing vapors that might be soporific, nauseating, or even mildly poisonous. In one memorable incident, the class brewed a swelling solution that erupted in a spray, causing arms and noses to balloon to grotesque sizes. Laughter filled the classroom, but behind the humor was a grim reality. These substances could alter human biology in terrifying ways. The more advanced the year, the more complex and dangerous the potions became. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the Tri-Wizard tournament brought potions of powerful magic into focus. The students heard of Polyjuice Potion and its ability to transform a person's entire body into another's form. This was not harmless fun. Misbrewing it could leave one partially transformed or trapped in a grotesque half-state. Hermione herself, in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, miscalculated her preparation by using cat hair instead of a human's. The result was catastrophic. She spent weeks in the hospital wing, sprouting fur, ears, and a tail. The film depicts this moment lightly, but the reality in text is chilling. A single misstep had altered her very form, and only skilled magical intervention saved her. The risks went beyond explosions and disfigurement. Some potions had intoxicating or addictive qualities that could manipulate the will of others. Amatentia, the most powerful love potion, carried the potential for obsession and coercion. A single sip could make a victim fall dangerously, irrationally in love with the giver. What might happen if an inexperienced student accidentally brewed something close to this potion and misused it on another? Slughorn, in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, introduced Amortentia with a smile, but even he admitted its dangerous potency. The classroom laughed at the different scents they smelled, yet beneath the humor lay the truth that such a potion could upend lives, binding people into false affections and twisted relationships. Felix Felicis, known as Liquid Luck, posed its own risks. Harry, in his 6th year, used it to secure crucial information from Professor Slughorn, but the potion was described as dangerous if overused. Too much could result in recklessness or death. Brewing Felix Felicis was a highly advanced process requiring months of careful preparation. A single miscalculation might ruin not just the batch, but the cauldron and its maker. In the hands of children, such a potion represented enormous danger. The temptation to try brewing it in secret could be irresistible, and the results catastrophic. The texts repeatedly highlight the hospital wing as the unspoken continuation of every potions class. Madame Pomfrey, with her stern efficiency, became the guardian angel of every careless stir or accidental spill. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione emerged from the dungeons, their skins sometimes tingled with burns, or their throats rasped from inhaled smoke. The hospital wing absorbed these injuries without fanfare, as though they were the expected toll of education. The films gave little attention to this steady stream of victims, yet the novels underscore how normalized danger had become. Hogwarts was a school where harm was part of learning. The potions classroom also exposed the darker theme of trust in authority. Professor Snape's disdain for his students often meant that struggling pupils received ridicule rather than guidance. He would sneer at Neville, muttering that the boy's mistakes might cause devastation, but offered little support to help him avoid them. This teaching style heightened the risks, creating an atmosphere of fear rather than learning. In a subject where precision was vital, fear itself became another ingredient in the cauldron, pushing students toward mistakes. The balance between discipline and danger tipped precariously, and the victims were often children caught in the crossfire of their own nerves and their teachers' cruelty. Consider also the implications of potion storage. Thousands of dangerous ingredients filled Snape's storerooms, and though guarded, they were accessible enough that Harry and his friends repeatedly raided them. Boomslang skin, lacewing flies, and powdered bicorn horn, all highly valuable and volatile, were taken by students who had no training in proper handling. In real terms, Hogwarts was a school where children could steal poisonous substances with minimal supervision. The potential for disaster was staggering, Hermione's misadventure with Polyjuice Potion was one example, but it is easy to imagine a less fortunate outcome if the ingredients had been misused or combined with other volatile materials. The novels also use potion making as a mirror for the unpredictable nature of magic itself. Potions were a physical manifestation of cause and effect, a chemical marriage of ingredients that demanded respect. Brewing was unforgiving. Unlike charms that could be attempted repeatedly with minor consequences, a potion either succeeded or exploded, healed or poisoned, transformed or destroyed. Each bubbling cauldron was a gamble, a constant reminder that magic was not a toy, but a dangerous force, bound only by discipline. For students like Harry, who thrived on improvisation, this subject was a brutal teacher in humility. Even the most advanced potions, such as the draught of living death, demonstrated the fine line between brilliance and catastrophe. A brew that induced a death-like slumber required such precision that even adult wizards could miscalculate. Snape himself highlighted this potion in his introduction to Harry's first lesson, boasting of its elegance and power. Yet to imagine young teenagers attempting it is to understand the ever-present danger. A misstep might not just cause a nose to swell or a shoe to dissolve, but place a student into a coma from which they might never awaken. Behind the humour of swelling ears or the comedy of Neville's fumbling hands was a dark truth. Every potions class was a battlefield of concentration where the enemy was not just Snape's sarcasm, but the unpredictable alchemy simmering in iron cauldrons. Explosions, toxic fumes, and dangerous brews were not hypothetical risks but everyday realities. Hogwarts itself accepted this danger as part of its culture, as if surviving a near-fatal accident in the dungeon was simply part of growing up as a wizard. The films captured the shadows, the sneers, and the gloomy lighting, but they rarely showed the essence of this peril, that each lesson held the possibility of permanent injury, twisted transformation, or manipulation of the human will. The novels left no doubt. Potions was not just an academic subject. It was the ever-present hazard of Hogwarts life. Number 18, Ancient Curses of the Castle. Hogwarts was never merely a school, it was a living fortress layered with enchantments so old that even the professors often admitted their ignorance. The stones themselves carried memory, and the air seemed to hum with latent power, as though every hallway was watching and waiting. J.K. Rowling captured this strange vitality when she wrote in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Some of the spells placed upon the castle walls were so ancient that even the professors could not always explain their nature. That single observation opens a darker, hidden question. If the defenders of knowledge could not always interpret Hogwarts enchantments, then what risks were students unknowingly walking into every day? The films presented the castle as whimsical, dangerous in places, but mostly knowable. Yet the truth buried in the pages suggests something more unsettling. Hogwarts was as unpredictable as it was protective. The founders left behind protections that were designed for war as much as for learning. Godric Gryffindor demanded strength, Helga Hufflepuff wove loyalty into her charms, Rowena Ravenclaw infused brilliance into the stonework, and Salazar Slytherin concealed ambition in places no one wanted to acknowledge. These spells were not just defensive shields against intruders, they were trials, riddles, and sometimes punishments. Centuries later, children like Harry, Hermione, and Ron wandered those same corridors without understanding what truly surrounded them. When staircases shifted or doors sealed themselves, the danger was not always a trick of architecture. It was the castle's ancient enchantments testing or even rejecting those who dared to tread. The moving staircases became almost a comic detail in the films, but the books hinted at something less benign. They did not simply change position at random. They sometimes refused passage to certain students, redirecting them toward places they had no intention of going. Imagine an 11-year-old first year lost in the thunder of hundreds of boots, only to find themselves deposited outside the entrance to the Forbidden Forest or the third-floor corridor that Dumbledore had explicitly declared off-limits. These movements were not mere inconveniences. They carried the echo of ancient trials. It was as if the castle wished to remind its inhabitants that knowledge must be earned, and that disobedience might be punished by exile into danger. Even worse were the enchanted corridors that acted as hidden transportation networks. There were whispered stories among older students of narrow hallways that twisted unexpectedly, carrying the walker far from their intended destination. Fred and George Weasley spoke with a mixture of awe and fear about passages that spat them out into broom closets on the opposite side of the castle, or into the freezing night air beyond the main walls. One anecdote, often overlooked, described a boy in the 1920s who disappeared entirely after stepping into what he thought was a familiar gallery. The professors quietly removed mention of the event from records, yet ghostly whispers among the portraits suggested the boy had been shunted into some pocket of magic that existed outside ordinary space. Such dangers never appeared in the cinematic adaptation, yet they resonate with the idea that Hogwarts itself was alive and sometimes cruel. Consider the Black Lake, stretching just beyond the castle walls. Students saw it as the home of merpeople and the resting place of the giant squid, but what few knew was that certain charms linked the dungeons directly to the waters. On rare nights, a trick of ancient magic caused the stones to sweat, and a careless student might step into a hallway that transformed into a tunnel of rushing water. Slytherins told tales of initiates who vanished in such floods, reappearing, gasping and terrified at the surface of the lake. The professors, perhaps aware but unwilling to alarm parents, dismissed these as exaggerations. Yet the architecture's uncanny fluidity suggested otherwise. Hogwarts could change not only the direction of passage, but the very element in which one walked. There was also the question of curses designed to repel invaders. Rowena Ravenclaw was said to have devised wards that confused the mind, sending unworthy intruders into endless loops until they collapsed in exhaustion. Centuries later, students still reported corridors where they walked for what felt like hours, only to emerge at the exact place they had entered. Filch, the caretaker, grumbled about these loops, claiming they swallowed his time as he tried to chase misbehaving pupils. What went unspoken was that such enchantments, though brilliant, did not distinguish between friend and foe. A Gryffindor hurrying to class could as easily become trapped as a dark wizard attempting infiltration. Hogwarts portraits carried their own kind of enchantment, often overlooked as harmless gossip. Yet behind the chatter lay the binding of souls to frames, a form of magic, not without its dangers. What if one of those guardians decided to mislead a student, not out of malice, but because of loyalties to long-dead masters? So Cadogan's chaotic directions were played for humour, yet the truth was darker. The living essence within the portraits could be fallible, deceptive, or even vengeful. Being guided by them through hidden passages might lead a child directly into wards that were never meant to be crossed. The Room of Requirement was the clearest example of dangerous enchantments misunderstood. To most students, it was a sanctuary, a place where wishes were granted in material form. But to those who studied deeper, it was a trap, woven by intent itself. The room gave not what one wanted, but what the castle decided one needed. Neville Longbottom once described how the room refused him simple comforts during the Carrow's reign of terror, instead pushing him toward weapons and strategies. Was this benevolent guidance, or was it manipulation? If the castle could choose how to respond to need, then students were never in control. They were, in truth, subjects of the castle's will. Peeves the Poltergeist embodied another layer of enchantment. Though never acknowledged as a product of the founder's design, his existence was tied to the chaos of the building. Unlike ghosts, who were the remnants of human souls, Peeves was the manifestation of magical mischief bound inseparably to the stones of Hogwarts. His ability to move objects, collapse suits of armor, and conjure projectiles was not merely personal power, it was the castle's own unpredictability, given voice and form. He was the embodiment of Hogwarts' dangerous laughter, the reminder that even joy could harm. Another unsettling example lay in the Forbidden Forest's proximity to the school. The enchantments around Hogwarts should have kept dangerous creatures at bay, yet centaurs, acromantulas, and werewolves prowled just beyond the tree line. Why would the founders allow this? The answer may lie in the old belief that strength is tempered by facing fear. But for children barely into adolescence, this philosophy bordered on cruelty. Harry himself nearly died during his very first detention, encountering Voldemort drinking unicorn blood. What sort of protective spellwork permitted a first year to be placed in such jeopardy? Perhaps it was not negligence at all, but the manifestation of a castle that believed in trial by terror. Even the ghosts carried warnings. The Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw, spoke of secrets hidden for centuries, her very existence bound to regret and betrayal. The Bloody Baron's chains clinked with blood, not symbolic, but remembered. Each ghost was tied to tragedy, and their presence within the school hinted at a deliberate reminder of mortality. To live in Hogwarts was to dwell daily among the dead, as if the castle insisted on keeping sorrow close to the living. Students learned, perhaps unconsciously, that death walked beside them in every corridor. Quidditch, pitches and classrooms were not exempt from such hidden dangers. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry's rogue bludger seemed the work of sabotage, yet even before Dobby's interference, enchanted objects within the school had a history of acting unpredictably. Flying desks, bewitched suits of armor, and self-animated quills were amusing until they rebelled. The line between enchantment and curse was razor-thin, and students were often the unsuspecting victims of magical artifacts that remembered their original commands imperfectly. There were also legends of sealed chambers beyond even the infamous Chamber of Secrets. Ancient staircases led downward into darkness, only to vanish when retraced. Students whispered of dungeons that swallowed light and echoed with voices no one could identify. These places may have been experiments abandoned by the founders, prisons for creatures long forgotten, or traps for enemies who never arrived. Whatever their origin, their persistence across centuries revealed that Hogwarts was less a sanctuary than a labyrinth of half-forgotten dangers. And Harry himself sensed the malevolence of the castle at times. When he first heard the basilisk's voice in the pipes, he was struck not only by the sound, but by the realization that the castle carried channels for a monster to move unseen. Those pipes were not natural, they were crafted and left hidden, awaiting activation by a Parselmouth. Hogwarts held within itself weapons that could awaken against its own children. That they did so only at the command of Salazar Slytherin's heir did not reduce their horror. It emphasized that the castle was an accomplice in danger, not merely a victim of it. What emerges when these fragments are stitched together is a portrait of a school more dangerous than protective, a castle whose enchantments lived by rules no longer understood. The books gave us glimpses of this reality, from corridors that misled to chambers that devoured, but the films softened the threat, painting Hogwarts as eccentric rather than treacherous. In truth, every child who crossed its threshold risked more than detentions or failing grades. They risked being swallowed by the very stones that promised to shelter them. The ancient curses of Hogwarts were never extinguished. They slept, waiting, always capable of turning a moment of wonder into a test of survival. Number 19, Quidditch, a sport on the verge of death. Of all the peculiarities of the wizarding world, few are as glorified yet as recklessly dangerous as the sport of Quidditch. At first glance, it seems like an exhilarating pastime, filled with the rush of wind and the thrill of flying above the earth. But when examined closely, the danger concealed beneath its spectacle is staggering. The films portray it as a grand, vibrant sport, with roaring crowds and flashes of excitement, but they rarely capture the sheer peril of the game. In the books, J.K. Rowling allows us to feel the razor's edge, on which every player balances. Children as young as 11 are thrown into the sky, mounted on broomsticks moving faster than most cars, soaring at dizzying heights where a single mistake can mean shattered bones, or worse. Hogwarts, astonishingly, not only tolerates this, but embraces it as the central school sport, a tradition so ingrained that no one dares question the wisdom of letting students risk their lives every term. Consider the raw speed alone. The Nimbus 2000, the broom Harry first receives, is described as the best broom currently on the market. Its capabilities are staggering for something handed to a first year. Players on these brooms can accelerate past 100 kilometers per hour, and all of it takes place high in the air, with no harnesses, no safety nets, and no protective gear beyond robes. When Harry dives for the snitch, as in the unforgettable scene from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling describes he was speeding toward the ground when the crowd gasped. Harry was falling like a stone, faster and faster, hurtling toward the earth. And then, in the very last moment, his hand shot out and he caught the snitch. That heart-pounding moment reads like a miracle of survival. Strip away the fantasy lens and you see what it truly is, an 11-year-old plummeting to the ground at terminal velocity, relying on reflexes alone to avoid death. The very structure of Quidditch invites catastrophe. Bludgers, bewitched iron balls are enchanted to assault players indiscriminately. We are told explicitly that their sole purpose is to knock athletes from their brooms. They slam into ribs, shoulders, and skulls with the force of a sledgehammer. In Chamber of Secrets, when Dobby interferes with the bludger, the book recounts how it was pelting toward Harry like a missile, its iron surface gleaming menacingly in the sun. It struck him with such violence that his arm bones were later vanished by the bumbling Gilderoy Lockhart, leaving Harry in agony and completely defenseless. This is not an isolated accident. It is built into the game's design. The audience cheers as if these moments are entertainment, but the reality is brutal. Every match is a calculated flirtation with disaster. What is even more alarming is the culture surrounding the sport. Teachers and students alike treat these risks as normal, as though broken bones and concussions are no different from scraped knees. Madame Pomfrey, the matron of the hospital wing, quietly repairs fracture after fracture, carrying the burden of a system that refuses to acknowledge its recklessness. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry is knocked from his broom during a match against Hufflepuff when Dementors appear. The text recounts, Harry felt his broom give a violent lurch, then the screaming inside his head made him lose grip. He was falling, tumbling out of control, arms flailing helplessly. He plunged from a height that could have killed him outright. The only thing that saved him was the accidental cushioning effect of the Whomping Willow tearing apart his Nimbus 2000. Such brushes with death are dismissed with remarkable nonchalance. The pressure on young athletes only adds to the peril. Quidditch is not a casual extracurricular activity. It is a pillar of school life, a tradition every house fiercely defends. Captains like Oliver Wood drive their teams with near-military discipline, often pushing players to practice in violent storms. In Chamber of Secrets, Rowling vividly describes how the rain was so heavy it was as though buckets of ice-cold water were being emptied continuously over their heads. Harry and his teammates were barely able to see, yet they flew for hours, soaked, frozen, and one mistake away from a fatal slip. This is framed as admirable dedication, but in reality, it is an institution that normalizes extreme risk, convincing children that their worth to their houses is proven only through enduring physical torment. The films smooth these edges, making Quidditch seem chaotic but playful, full of roaring crowds and vivid effects. The novels reveal something darker. Matches are prolonged battles of endurance, where players collide mid-air, where the elements become adversaries as dangerous as any bludger, and where the snitch, worth more points than the entire match combined, forces seekers to hurl themselves into suicidal dives repeatedly until luck or reflex saves them. In Goblet of Fire, when Victor Crumb appears in the Quidditch World Cup, Rowling emphasizes the risk even at the professional level. Crumb dived so violently after the snitch that he hurtled toward the ground and then pulled out of the dive with such force that his broom tail splintered. If even professionals risk death and mutilation, what chance do 11-year-old students truly have? Every injury adds to Madame Pomfrey's list of miracles. Harry alone spends countless nights in the hospital wing because of Quidditch. Broken bones, collapsed lungs, a lack of skeletal structure after Lockhart's meddling, these are not rare occurrences but predictable outcomes. The text itself acknowledges Pomfrey's frustration, describing her fury at Lockhart's incompetence and her repeated chastising of Harry for putting himself at risk. She becomes the quiet guardian of Hogwarts' most dangerous tradition, patching up the wounded with the efficiency of a battlefield nurse. The fact that the school's medical professional must play this role should raise questions about whether Quidditch belongs in a place of learning at all. One of the most chilling aspects is how normalized this violence is among the students. Fred and George Weasley treat bludger assaults as part of the fun. Lee Jordan, the commentator, turns injuries into entertainment, narrating them as if they are highlights of the match. Even Harry himself grows desensitized, diving headfirst into peril again and again, as though courting disaster is part of his identity. It is worth noting that the same boy who survives Voldemort's attacks repeatedly also risks his life willingly for a school game. The psychology here is profound. Hogwarts conditions its children to accept danger as ordinary, to see pain and injury as badges of honor. The magical enhancements of Quidditch equipment only deepen the danger. Brooms are enchanted for speed, acceleration, and maneuverability, but rarely for safety. The same enchantments that allow sharp dives also make sudden crashes inevitable. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry's broom was even confiscated by Professor Umbridge as part of her crackdown on student activities. What is revealing is not her cruelty in doing so, but the fact that no one considered banning the sport itself. The idea of cancelling Quidditch is more unthinkable than the loss of student safety, truth that speaks volumes about the misplaced priorities of Hogwarts culture. The snitch itself represents perhaps the most dangerous element of all. By design, it forces seekers to abandon all caution. Its small size and rapid, darting movement drive players into reckless dives, sometimes straight into the ground. Rowling herself described the snitch as the holy grail of the match, yet it is an object that regularly lures players into near-fatal falls. Harry's repeated brushes with death are directly linked to the snitch's elusiveness. In reality, the sport could be restructured to remove such risks, but the snitch remains a sacred tradition, worshipped more than the player's safety. Even the weather becomes a weapon. Quidditch is played in rain, snow, and violent storms, conditions that magnify the already staggering danger. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry's match against Hufflepuff in a torrential downpour is described in agonizing detail. His whole body was freezing, numb with cold, but he kept flying. Visibility was near zero, lightning slashed the sky, and yet the game went on as if no force of nature could pause it. The very elements become spectators, eager to claim a victim. How can a school justify subjecting its students to such conditions for the sake of entertainment? Professional Quidditch, as seen during the Quidditch World Cup, only reinforces the idea that this is not a sport for children. Death Eaters attacked during that same event, reminding us that the very arena of the sport is vulnerable to violence beyond the game itself. But even without dark wizards, the game's inherent design courts destruction. Watching professionals break bones for glory sends a message to Hogwarts students. This is the pinnacle to which you should aspire. It is heroism, they are told, to sacrifice your body for your house or your country. When one surveys the pattern, the conclusion is inescapable. Quidditch is not a harmless pastime, but a ritualized form of danger, a spectacle of controlled chaos where injuries are inevitable and survival is treated as skill. The books reveal this with chilling clarity. The films, eager to showcase dazzling visuals, tone it down for audiences, But behind every cheer and every golden flash of the snitch lies the truth. Hogwarts has enshrined a sport that constantly places its children a breath away from tragedy. Number 20. Enchantments in the walls themselves. The shifting corridors of Hogwarts are one of the strangest and least predictable aspects of the castle, yet the films almost entirely ignore this unnerving phenomenon. The books, however, describe in haunting detail how the walls and staircases refuse to remain stable, creating a constant sense of disorientation. Hogwarts is not merely a building, it is a sentient labyrinth. J.K. Rowling makes this clear in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, where it is written, "The staircases in Hogwarts changed shape every Friday." This instability is often treated with a touch of humour, as if the castle enjoys playing pranks on its inhabitants. But beneath that whimsical image lies a darker implication. The very structure in which young witches and wizards are supposed to feel safe is a living, shifting organism that can betray them without warning. One of the most chilling examples appears early in Harry's first year. While trying to find his way to class, he discovers that the corridors refuse to stay consistent. He notices that the corridors constantly changed shape and direction, so that even the older students sometimes got lost in familiar places. The key phrase here is constantly. This is not an occasional quirk. It is a permanent, relentless feature of daily life inside the castle. It means that the children who live there cannot fully trust the ground beneath their feet or the walls around them. Imagine being 11 years old, separated from your friends, and finding that the path you took yesterday has vanished into nothingness. Hogwarts becomes a testing ground, not only of magical skill, but of raw survival instinct. The very fact that Hogwarts can trap a student is illustrated by the castle's habit of sealing off entire passageways. The doors refuse to open unless one knows the precise password, incantation, or trick. Neville Longbottom's humiliation with the Gryffindor common room password shows how merciless the castle can be. On more than one occasion, the fat lady's portrait refused him entry, leaving him stranded in dark hallways late at night. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Sirius Black slashed the fat lady's portrait, the entire Gryffindor house was left without shelter, forced to sleep in the Great Hall. If the castle can deny safety to hundreds of children because of one incident, what else is it capable of withholding? The danger is not merely in the intruders that may enter Hogwarts, but in the castle itself, which chooses when and how its children may rest. Consider also the vanishing steps on the staircases, a feature never fully shown in the films. Harry, Ron and Hermione constantly had to avoid these treacherous gaps. Step in the wrong place and you would find your leg sinking through stone, as if the staircase had transformed into a pitfall. In the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, there were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. These were not mere eccentricities. For a distracted or frightened child, forgetting which step to leap over could result in being trapped alone until someone came to help. The castle seems to thrive on keeping its inhabitants in a state of permanent alertness, as though demanding constant vigilance from children as young as 11. The films show Hogwarts as grand, majestic, and at times dangerous, but they never capture the claustrophobic terror of being lost within its walls. In the Chamber of Secrets, Harry and Ron are described as wandering down deserted stone corridors in search of answers, but what is often forgotten is that the corridors themselves shifted, twisting into new shapes. A corridor that led to the library at one moment could spiral into a dead end the next. This is more than inconvenience. It is a deliberate test of endurance. It almost feels like the castle feeds on confusion, waiting to see which student can overcome its tricks. For every brave Gryffindor who treats it like an adventure, there must be dozens of quiet Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws who endure sleepless nights, afraid to venture far from their dormitories for fear of never finding their way back. One cannot forget that the castle has swallowed entire generations of students who left behind no explanation for their disappearances. Though the books never dwell on this, the lore surrounding Hogwarts suggests that countless hidden passageways and sealed rooms remain unexplored. The Room of Requirement is the most famous example, a chamber that appears only to those who truly need it. But if the castle can manifest such a room at will, how many others lie waiting, unseen, perhaps trapping those who stumble across them? When Draco Malfoy uses the Room of Requirement in The Half-Blood Prince, the castle essentially conspires with him, providing a hidden workshop where he can plot against Dumbledore. In this sense, Hogwarts is not merely neutral. It chooses sides, and its choices may place students in grave danger. Even Dumbledore, the wisest wizard in the school, acknowledges that he does not know all the secrets of the castle. In the Chamber of Secrets, he tells Harry that Hogwarts will always be there to welcome you home. Yet there is an ominous undertone to that reassurance. A home that shifts, blocks and traps is not entirely comforting. When Dumbledore admits ignorance of the castle's full design, he is confessing that no one is truly in control. If the headmaster himself cannot predict its transformations, then the safety of every child inside is ultimately at the mercy of walls and corridors that operate on their own mysterious will. The Marauder's map offers another clue to the castle's disturbing vitality. Created by 4 mischievous students, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs, the map does not simply record the layout of Hogwarts but updates itself in real time, showing moving figures within its borders. This suggests that Hogwarts is aware of every step taken inside it. The map's accuracy means that the castle is constantly observing, constantly recording, like a living creature with countless eyes. The question then arises, if the map reveals this awareness, what is the castle itself doing with such knowledge? It is not unreasonable to fear that Hogwarts could deliberately shift its corridors to guide or mislead its inhabitants based on some inscrutable motive. One terrifying scenario comes directly from Rowling's description. Imagine a child left alone at night in such a corridor where all paths back suddenly disappear. The thought is chilling. A first year, perhaps a timid student from a Muggle family, wandering after curfew, could suddenly find themselves sealed off from all familiar routes. The torches burn low, shadows lengthen, and the walls close in with cruel indifference. The student pounds on stone doors that refuse to open, their cries swallowed by the endless corridors. No teacher can hear them. The castle has chosen its test subject, and survival depends not on skill or knowledge, but on sheer luck and stamina. This danger is never dramatized in the films, yet it lingers over the pages of the books like a silent threat. Filch, the caretaker, provides indirect evidence of these dangers. His lifelong bitterness and obsession with catching students wandering at night may not be merely cruelty, but necessity. As a squib, Filch cannot defend himself magically against the castle's tricks, yet he knows better than anyone how quickly the walls can betray an unsuspecting child. His ever-present lantern and knowledge of hidden passageways may make him the most practical protector of Hogwarts, though he is hated by nearly all students. In his gruff way, he acknowledges the truth. Wandering Hogwarts at night is not only against the rules, it is perilous. Without a guide, the corridors themselves can become deadly. The Forbidden Corridor in the Philosopher's Stone demonstrates how the castle deliberately conceals threats. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stumble upon Fluffy, the three-headed dog, only because the shifting layout and their own curiosity guide them there. How many similar creatures remain hidden by the castle's rearrangements? What if a student wandering at night is not merely trapped but directed towards something far more sinister? Hogwarts seems capable of not only confusing its inhabitants, but steering them into peril, as though selecting the worthy from the weak. The films simplify this into locked doors and grand chambers, but the books leave the unsettling impression of a predator disguised as a home. The moving staircases also create chaos during emergencies. When the basilisk roams the castle in the Chamber of Secrets, Students are ordered to remain in groups, yet the constant instability of the staircases would have made orderly evacuation nearly impossible. One wrong turn, one staircase swinging into darkness, and a student could find themselves face to face with a monster. This is never acknowledged in the narrative, but the reality is unavoidable. Hogwarts, by design or instinct, denies certainty. In a moment of crisis, it could doom the very children it was built to protect. The existence of ghosts further illustrates the castle's control over space. Nearly Headless Nick, the Bloody Baron, and the Grey Lady all roam the corridors with freedom unknown to the living. They glide through walls unaffected by shifting staircases. Their presence hints that Hogwarts has layers of reality inaccessible to the living students. The ghosts seem comfortable within this shifting maze, suggesting that the castle reveals a more stable form to the dead. For the living, however, Hogwarts remains unpredictable, a place where walls might open or close with no warning, guided by logic only the castle itself understands. One cannot ignore Peeves the poltergeist, whose chaos is amplified by the castle's malleable design. Peeves thrives on confusion, leading students into trick staircases or locked rooms. But perhaps it is not only Peeves who manipulates the space. Perhaps the castle itself provides him with opportunities, opening hidden doorways at just the right moment for him to cause maximum disruption. If Peeves is the spirit of mischief, Hogwarts itself is the stage that allows his mischief to become torment. The collaboration between poltergeist and castle makes for a uniquely hostile environment where students must balance magical studies with constant vigilance against being trapped or humiliated. It is easy to romanticize Hogwarts as the enchanted castle of childhood dreams, with its enchanted ceilings and cozy common rooms. Yet the deeper one studies the texts, the more one realizes that it is also a dangerous labyrinth, alive with intentions no one fully understands. The shifting walls, vanishing staircases, sealed rooms, and misleading corridors combine to form a single, unsettling truth. Hogwarts itself is a test, and not all students emerge unscathed. The films gave us a vision of grandeur. The books remind us that within those same walls, danger lurked in every shadow, every creak of stone, every corridor that should have led to safety, but instead led only deeper into the unknown. Number 21. Summoned spirits and magical experiments. In the world of Hogwarts, the dangers that were shown in films often felt neatly contained. The basilisk had its lair, the Dementors had their posts around the castle, and the Tri-Wizard Tournament's threats were carefully arranged within a magical arena. Yet in the books there are hints of something more chaotic, more unpredictable, and far more unnerving: the reckless magical experiments carried out by students, experiments that could conjure entities no teacher was prepared to face. These episodes were usually brushed aside with humor or a single line, but the implications are chilling. When we look closer, we begin to understand that the real peril of Hogwarts was not always the creatures hidden in its chambers, but the spirits and beings that students could summon by accident, simply because they were curious and underprepared. One of the clearest examples of such danger came in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Gilderoy Lockhart's lessons dissolved into absurdity. J.K. Rowling writes, «На практических занятиях у профессора Локхарта чаще всего происходили взрывы и побеги тварей». The English version renders it, «In practical lessons with Professor Lockhart, there were usually explosions or escapes of some sort». What sounds amusing at first quickly becomes disturbing when one imagines what could have gone wrong if a single spell had ripped open a door to something darker than a jar of Cornish pixies. Lockhart's incompetence was a shield of comedy, but behind it lay the terrifying thought that students were practicing charms without true guidance, leaving the possibility that they might summon or unleash things even the professors could not banish easily. The core issue was not only Lockhart's foolishness, it was the fact that Hogwarts itself was a living reservoir of ancient magic, filled with artifacts, wards, and energies layered across centuries. When a 14-year-old tried a charm that should have been harmless but mispronounced a word or flicked a wand at the wrong angle, the castle might amplify that error in unexpected ways. It is no stretch to imagine a second-year student attempting a summoning charm, hoping to call a simple object from the dormitory and instead pulling in a wandering spirit clinging to the ruins of the castle's past. In a place like Hogwarts, where ghosts roamed freely and enchanted suits of armor patrolled corridors, the veil between the safe and the spectral was thin. We know from the books that magic left behind echoes and imprints. The diary of Tom Riddle was the clearest warning, a soul fragment infused with ink and parchment that could manipulate a living child. If a simple diary could do this, then what might a misfired incantation call forth from the shadows? Imagine a group of students in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, laughing nervously as one of them reads from a dusty text left by an overconfident predecessor. A circle of light begins to spin on the floor. Smoke rises, and suddenly something half-formed steps into the room. Not a solid creature like a pixie, but a drifting figure, confused and angry, unwilling to be sent back. A creature like this would not be locked away in the Chamber of Secrets or guarded by enchantments. It would simply wander the hallways searching for warmth, life, or revenge. The books give us another glimpse in the form of Peeves, the poltergeist. Peeves was not a ghost, but an entity born from centuries of student mischief and accumulated magical chaos. If Hogwarts itself could create a being like Peeves without a direct summoning, then what might happen if young witches and wizards deliberately or accidentally invited something in? Peeves was harmless enough, though cruel and chaotic, but his existence proves the school's fabric could generate or host things not of ordinary flesh and blood. And unlike ghosts, these beings were not bound by human memory or sentiment. They were accidents, unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The danger also lay in the culture of Hogwarts. Students were encouraged to experiment, to test their limits. Professor Flitwick cheered when a charm produced unexpected sparks, and even Professor McGonagall, strict as she was, allowed her pupils to attempt difficult transformations. But the thin line between a surprising success and a catastrophic mistake was rarely acknowledged. Consider Seamus Finnegan, whose attempts at charms frequently ended in explosions. The films turned him into comic relief, but the books made it clear that his mistakes had real force. Scorching eyebrows and blasting apart objects. What if one of those explosions had triggered not a physical mishap, but a rift in magical space? The sound of laughter in the classroom masks a chilling possibility. Hogwarts could have been minutes away from disaster more often than anyone realized. There is also the dark allure of summoning itself. From the very first year, students were introduced to spells of calling and transformation. The summoning charm, Accio, was simple but potent. We saw Harry use it to bring his firebolt during the Triwizard Tournament. Yet the summoning charm's rules were unclear. Could it pull only objects? Could it call living things? Could it drag something unwilling from another plane? A 14-year-old experimenting late at night might not ask those questions. The castle, already home to shadows, could answer in the worst possible way. A flick of a wand, a whispered word, and suddenly a creature of claws and whispers might step into a corridor, unwilling to leave. The atmosphere of Hogwarts, too, must be considered. The Forbidden Forest stood as a reminder that dangerous beings lived only meters away. Centaurs, acromantulas, and even werewolves roamed near enough to the castle that magical accidents could attract their attention. When Ron's broken wand caused spells to backfire, when Neville's nervous hand misfired charms, there was always the unspoken risk that something in the forest might feel the ripple and come closer. In a magical ecosystem like this, every mistake was a signal, every spark a potential invitation. The castle's walls might not have been strong enough to keep everything out. The quote from Chamber of Secrets about Lockhart's lessons is particularly chilling when paired with what we know of his vanity. He had no skill, Yet he placed students in situations where creatures escaped regularly. If pixies could flood a classroom and wreak havoc, then what about a more serious beast? The Ministry of Magic regulated magical creatures for a reason. Yet here was a teacher letting school children attempt to corral them without safeguards. Imagine if a student, imitating a professor's arrogance, decided to summon their own pet spirit to impress friends. That spirit would not vanish with a counter-curse. It might linger in the shadows beyond the reach of authority. We cannot ignore the fact that Hogwarts was haunted already. Nearly Headless Nick, the Fat Friar, and the Grey Lady all proved that death itself could not keep souls from lingering in the castle. If death was not an end within these walls, then surely summoning rituals could bind or disturb these spirits further. What if a careless spell pulled the Grey Lady not as a harmless ghost, but as the vengeful daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, twisted by centuries of grief? Hogwarts ghosts were calm only because they chose to be. But one wrong word could awaken their other selves, the versions burdened by pain, and the result could terrify even the bravest aura. There were glimpses of this risk in the very subject students studied. Defense against the dark arts was not only about blocking curses, it was about confronting things that lived in shadows. Professor Lupin showed them boggarts, creatures that became nightmares given form. The films softened this lesson with humor, but the books revealed how dangerous such entities could be. A creature that feeds on fear and lives in cupboards might well have been joined by other, less defined beings if students had meddled too far with summoning spells. Hogwarts was a breeding ground not only for knowledge, but for nightmares waiting to be called. Even advanced students were not immune. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry's attempts with spells from the mysterious textbook led him to use Sectum Sempra on Draco. A curse found in the margins of a book nearly killed a classmate. If a scribbled note could harbor such destructive magic, then how many other dangerous incantations lay hidden in the library? The restricted section hinted at horrors students were tempted to try. Hermione warned often that magic beyond their comprehension could destroy them, yet curiosity was stronger than fear, and accidents were inevitable. Some accidents left scars, others might have left spirits roaming the castle unseen. The most frightening thought is that we may never have known the full extent of these accidents. The professors might have quietly erased them, casting containment spells, memory charms, or sealing corridors for reasons never explained to students. A darkened hallway might not always be the result of poor lighting. It could be a subtle ward keeping a restless being contained. The smiling portraits on the walls might chatter to hide the fact that something darker moved behind the canvas. Hogwarts presented itself as a place of learning, but it might also have been a place of quiet cover-ups, where summoned things were returned, bound, or hidden before the wider magical world could learn of them. Ultimately, the films gave us a Hogwarts that was dangerous in clear cinematic ways, giant snakes, werewolves, Death Eaters at the gates. But the books whisper of subtler threats, the kind born from human error and teenage curiosity. A single experiment, a misfired charm, an overconfident attempt at summoning could have invited spirits or creatures that had no reason to leave. The danger of Hogwarts was not only in what lurked beneath its foundations, but in the unguarded hands of its students who played with forces far older and more ruthless than they understood. Number 22. Living armor and statues. Of all the details hidden in J.K. Rowling's world, few are as overlooked as the strange and unsettling presence of Hogwarts' living armor and statues. In the films, these silent guardians remain in the background until the final desperate hours of the Battle of Hogwarts, when Professor McGonagall famously brings them to life to defend the castle. Yet in the books, the reader is quietly warned much earlier. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Rowling slips in a sentence that chills when one stops to consider it. Sometimes it looked as though the knights in the portraits were muttering to each other or had changed their positions while no one was watching. The armor and statues were not merely decorative. They carried within them the possibility of movement, the echo of ancient spells that might respond without human command. And if those enchantments were ever to falter, the consequences for young students wandering through the castle would be horrifying. Hogwarts was never meant to be a safe place in the conventional sense. The castle's magic was layered across centuries, often forgotten, sometimes misunderstood, and always unpredictable. The founders had embedded protections so strong that even Voldemort himself struggled to breach them, but those same defenses could also become dangerous to the very children they were built to guard. In the case of the enchanted armor, it is easy to forget that what the books describe is not a parade of puppets waiting passively for orders. These are full-sized medieval war constructs forged in steel, infused with rudimentary awareness, and positioned in corridors where first years might stumble past late at night. Imagine the thin, clattering sound of a gauntlet moving, not quite in sync with the silence of the hall, as if some unseen hand adjusted its grip on a spear. Harry himself felt it, in the unease of walking past the suits that seemed just a little too attentive. The danger was not hypothetical. Hogwarts had a long history of magical accidents, and enchanted objects gone wrong were a recurring theme. The cursed opal necklace, for instance, proved deadly when handled without care. The diary of Tom Riddle trapped Ginny Weasley in its sinister web. Even the Marauder's map, a tool of mischief, revealed the castle's dangerous unpredictability when Harry discovered Peter Pettigrew listed among the living. If such items, crafted by singular wizards, could behave in ways their creators never intended, what of dozens of animated suits of armor spread across the school, maintained not by one master but by layers of institutional magic passed down through centuries? The very thought suggests a ticking time bomb hidden in plain sight. There is also the chilling precedent of other moving statues within the wizarding world. In the Department of Mysteries, the fountain statues in the Ministry's atrium sprang to life during the duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort, shielding Harry from curses. These constructs, majestic and powerful, were made of gold and stone, yet their sudden vitality made them more formidable than human guards. If such creations could take lethal spells meant for a child, one must admit their capacity for force. A single suit of armor in Hogwarts could, if turned hostile, crush bones with one swing. Their halberds, their swords, their sheer iron weight were not harmless props. The very magic that allowed them to march under McGonagall's command could also turn them into weapons against the innocent. Hogwarts students already faced countless daily perils, moving staircases, trick steps that swallowed ankles, shifting walls, poltergeists eager for chaos. But the armor carried a different kind of menace because it blurred the line between protector and predator. One can picture Neville Longbottom, nervous and unlucky, hurrying to class only to stumble into the path of a restless suit of mail that misinterprets his movement as a threat. Or consider Draco Malfoy strutting down the corridor late at night when suddenly the visor of a nearby helm swivels to follow him. In such moments, the atmosphere of the school shifts from whimsical to nightmarish. It is telling that Rowling allowed her characters to sense this, even if no direct attacks were described before the battle. The suggestion was enough to leave the reader uneasy. The spells that animated these suits were never described in detail, which leaves room for speculation. Were they controlled by the same ancient enchantments that kept the castle walls standing against siege? Or were they bound by lesser charms requiring constant reinforcement by the staff? If the latter, then the possibility of decay is obvious. Spells erode, charms weaken. Even the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall required maintenance to mirror the sky above. What happens when the binding spell of a 15th century armourer runs thin? Would the armour collapse harmlessly into pieces, or would it thrash wildly, its magic destabilizing into aggression? Wizards knew well the danger of backfired enchantments. Hogwarts was filled with the remnants of them. Consider the example of the chess set in Philosopher's Stone. Those carved pieces, enchanted for a game, struck with violent force, capable of smashing opponents into rubble. Ron Weasley himself nearly lost his life when he mounted a piece in the enchanted game. The parallel is unmistakable. If simple chessmen could inflict such destruction, what could life-sized armored guardians do in the enclosed corridors of Hogwarts? One swing from a mace would be enough to shatter stone. Against a child, it would be fatal in an instant. This was not the gentle magic of floating candles or self-writing quills. This was the cold, brutal side of enchantment, where magic turned iron into a living opponent. Even in ordinary times, the presence of the armor unsettled the students. Peeves, the poltergeist, delighted in rattling helmets and throwing parts of armor at passing children, proof that these constructs were not inert. The ghosts, too, treated them with a wary amusement. Nearly headless Nick once glided past a line of them with exaggerated care, as if to avoid some hidden temper. Hermione Granger, ever logical, once commented on how Hogwarts contained more enchantments than any one wizard could account for. She was right. The armor was a puzzle piece in a much larger and darker picture, a school alive in ways even its teachers did not fully control. The staff may have trusted the armor, but that trust was not grounded in certainty. McGonagall's spell during the Battle of Hogwarts, Per Totem Locomotor, was meant to mobilize the statues and suits of armor as defenders. Her authority was respected by them, but what if another wizard had attempted the same command? Could a Death Eater have seized control of those guardians, turning the castle's own walls against its children? The thought is terrifying. In fact, one might argue that this was why the armor was kept passive until the last stand, to minimize the risk of misuse. Yet even dormancy is no guarantee of safety. In a castle where portraits whispered, staircases reconfigured, and ghosts roamed, what assurance was there that the armor would always obey the will of the headmaster? Rowling's choice to describe the statues and armor as subtly moving rather than openly hostile was deliberate, but that choice only deepens the horror. The suggestion of life where none should exist unsettles more than open threat. Readers caught that detail, the helmets turned slightly, the gauntlets resting differently than before, and felt the weight of a presence that did not belong. For Harry, who had seen enough horrors by his third year, it was one more mystery to file away. For us, it was an unspoken warning. The castle was never truly safe. Protection and danger were two sides of the same spell. The enchantments themselves may have been tied to Hogwarts' founding magic. Godric Gryffindor was known for his bravery and martial skill. It is easy to imagine him enchanting armor to guard the halls. Salazar Slytherin, with his mistrust of outsiders, may have approved of such defenses. Helga Hufflepuff, ever practical, might have insisted that the guardians serve to deter intruders, and Rowena Ravenclaw, with her intellect, could have crafted the spells that gave the suits awareness enough to act. If this is true, then the armor is not just decoration, it is the lingering hand of the founders themselves, guardians long past the grave. But even the founders could not foresee every risk. The living statues also hint at the blurred boundary between sentience and enchantment. The house elves of Hogwarts, enslaved yet magical, carried out daily tasks with will of their own. The portraits of headmasters gave advice long after death, some so sharp and wise that they felt alive. The sorting hat sang with genuine thought each year. Was the armor merely another step in that uncanny chain? Were these suits only mindless shells, or did they feel in some small way the passage of centuries, growing restless in their niches? If so, then the danger was not only mechanical, but emotional, the fury of beings bound in iron, denied purpose until war roused them. It is sobering to think that the students of Hogwarts lived alongside these guardians for years without incident, but it is equally sobering to admit that the absence of catastrophe does not mean safety. Magic in Rowling's world is rarely benign. It exacts a price, it misfires, it betrays. Harry's life is proof enough of that. The armor and statues were silent warnings. They stood in every corridor, a reminder that Hogwarts was built not as a schoolhouse but as a fortress, and fortresses are not designed for comfort. They are designed for war, and in a fortress, even the decorations can kill. Number 23, owls and their nightly flights. In the magical world of Hogwarts, owls are depicted as the most efficient and romanticized postal system. They cut through the night sky, wings spread wide, letters tied to their legs with careful twine. Yet beneath this charm lies a danger that is rarely acknowledged, particularly in the films, which smooth over the chaos. In truth, these birds are wild creatures, sharp talons, unpredictable temperaments, and heavy cargoes balanced precariously as they swoop over the heads of unsuspecting children. The books themselves give small hints of this peril, such as when hundreds of owls streamed into the hall, dropping letters and parcels to the crowd below, in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It is a fleeting moment, almost whimsical, but anyone who pauses to picture the reality understands how close each mealtime comes to disaster. Consider the scene in the first book where Harry sits with Ron, still new to this strange school, trying to eat porridge under the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall. Rowling writes, "A tawny owl swooped low and nearly knocked over Ron's porridge bowl." At first glance, this feels like a comical interruption, something that makes the wizarding world more lively. But think of the beak, the weight of the wings, and the talons that almost skimmed Ron's scalp. In a world where even a minor spell can heal a cut, may be easy to laugh. Yet what if the owl had been carrying a package of iron cauldrons from Diagon Alley, or a box of potions that shattered upon impact? The danger suddenly expands into something far darker. Hedwig, Harry's loyal snowy owl, was consistently portrayed as gentle and intelligent, a creature of pure loyalty. But even she had her moments of defiance. In Chamber of Secrets, she pecked Harry furiously after being locked in her cage for too long. The text describes how she gave a particularly loud screech and ruffled her feathers in annoyance. Imagine dozens of owls like Hedwig, all with individual personalities, soaring together through the echoing hall. Not every owl is as affectionate as Harry's companion. Many belong to older students who are less inclined to treat them kindly. Some are forced to carry burdens that strain their wings. Irritation, exhaustion, or hunger could easily lead to aggression. In the films, this spectacle is reduced to a quick visual, a graceful flock descending from the ceiling. The reality in the books is much messier. Feathers float down like confetti. Parcels burst open mid-flight, scattering sweets across the tables. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Errol, the Weasley family's elderly owl, crashes dramatically while attempting to deliver a package of screaming yo-yos, leaving the Gryffindor table in chaos. This is not a harmless inconvenience. If Errol had struck a student in the face with his beak, or if the yo-yos had exploded on impact, the incident could have ended in blood and panic rather than laughter. The Great Hall itself is not designed for such interruptions. The enchanted ceiling, magnificent as it is, does not protect the children below from falling debris. Students already sit in a confined space, shoulder to shoulder, at long tables where food fills every inch. Into this crowd descends an army of winged messengers, often with no regard for timing. The chaos is described vividly in Goblet of Fire when Harry receives a heavy parcel of food from Mrs. Weasley. The owl drops it directly onto the table, landing with a heavy thump among the marmalade. Had the aim been slightly off, the package could have struck Neville, who already had a reputation for accidents. The moment is funny on paper, but the underlying truth is more sobering. It is also crucial to remember that owls are nocturnal predators. By nature, they hunt small animals with lethal precision. Their claws are designed to pierce flesh, their eyes are tuned to the smallest movements in the dark. When Hogwarts relies on them for post, it essentially invites a fleet of hunters into spaces filled with children. The books never describe an owl attacking a student directly, but they come close enough to make the possibility plausible. Ron's porridge, Neville's clumsiness, And even Errol's dramatic crashes are warnings disguised as jokes. Readers can sense the weight of potential danger even in light-hearted passages. The danger extends beyond physical injury. Owls often carry food parcels from home, laden with homemade pies, cakes, and sweets. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry receives a package of treacle fudge from Mrs. Weasley. The owl delivering it is clearly strained by the burden, and when it drops the parcel, it bursts open, scattering food across the table. Now imagine dozens of owls dropping dozens of food packages at once. Perishable items splatter on robes, sticky sweets attract pests, and feathers mix with mashed potatoes. Such conditions are not only unpleasant but unhygienic, a breeding ground for illness in a boarding school filled with hundreds of students.